what I'd like each of you to tell me in 1 minute are two things. One is, what are the policy credentials you bring to the table that make you qualified for this? And two is what are the three top issues that concern you? And by that, all I want to do is I want one or two words, what are the topics? We'll put them all together. I want to see where you guys overlap and such. And then we can go through the topics and sort it through, if you don't mind. So let's start with you, Ty, and just because that's the way I have you guys in my notes.
Okay.
And take it away.
Well, I feel like the background and the experience I have with setting policy, a lot of it stems from my experience in the military, as far as enforcing and holding people accountable to policies, to military law. And then in my corporate background, I was responsible for sitting on boards and on teams to help set different policies in our HR department to make sure that we were, one, staying abreast with the current law, and then two, we were doing what was right by the people to make them feel comfortable in the organization. And then finally, in my experience as a consultant, I have actually gone out and trained board of directors for public and private institutions on how to implement policies and how to hold themselves and their employees accountable to policies.
What sort of board of directors are you?
One in particular, the board of directors for El Belta Arms over in San Francisco, the large senior community center home over in San Francisco. My consulting firm went and actually had a 6-hour training session with them on how to properly implement and what their legal responsibilities were when it came to harassment, discrimination in the workplace.
It's a little bit different animal than public sector. Do you help me understand do you have experience with public sector governance in any way?
I don't have a lot of experience with the public sector and governance. I am a political novice.
And have you spent much time at the board meetings?
I've attended a few board meetings, yes I have.
And your top three issues?
My top three issues will be: one, maintaining the focus on our community; two, finding ways to reduce our costs; and three, finding more sources for funding for our community colleges.
And if I may ask, what gets you into this? I mean, it's less clear with you than the other two candidates here in terms of giving your background, why this attracts you.
Well, it attracts me primarily because I have a sense of service that was instilled in me at West Point. Unfortunately, I was medically discharged from the Army, so I wasn't able to continue service. So I just have a desire to serve my community. As I go around, I talk to people. I've had many people tell me I should be in some type of public office. So I felt this was an opportunity for me to continue to serve my community, and then also to branch out and to do something where I feel that right now in elected offices we have more politicians and leaders. I feel like I'm a leader and I come from a leadership background, and I want to apply that in public office.
Is it Tribune?
Tribune, yes.
You're on.
Thank you. My background experience is my direct leadership in community colleges and policy making is what I believe qualifies me for the position. Serving as the student trustee from the years 2010 to 2011 gave me insight into Peralta, not only from a student point of view, but from a policy making point of view.
Okay, let me just ask you, 2010, 2011, what did you see go on that year?
2010, 2011 was a very interesting year.
What were your takeaways? What were the things that made an impression on you, and what was your thinking on it?
During my term, I saw a lot of change in staffing and change in policy. And the changes that I saw taking place at the time gave me a feeling that we were moving in the right direction. and that we were moving away from some of our bad practices and gearing more toward coming together as an organization and
Be
becoming more
specific.
stable.
Was that the year that LAP resigned?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And was that the year I guess the credit cards came out the year before, as I recall.
Correct.
And was that the year that we were embroiled with you guys in court?
Yes.
What did you think of all that?
It was scary to say the least.
Why?
That as an organization we were so dysfunctional, for lack of a better word,
Go ahead, hon.
and the need for some stronger leadership at the head.
Okay, and so then you went on and you're on the statewide board.
Correct. Serve as,
Okay.
on the board of governors, and that is the policy.
And that is not a student position, right? You are,
It is a student position,
Okay.
but I am a full-fledged voting member.
whereas you were not on the Peralta board.
Correct.
Right? Okay. And what are the differences you see?
In terms of the state and the district?
Yeah, in
Okay.
terms of having sat on two boards.
The differences I see, having a vote gives my voice a little bit more strength, a little more influence than I had in Peralta. I'm completely involved with every aspect on the state level, whereas in Peralta, the student trustees were not allowed to sit in closed session. So there is a lot of discussion and things that happened that were behind closed doors that the student trustees were not aware of. On the state level, I have been involved in personnel issues as well as budgetary issues and the development of policy. So it's given me a better perspective on what happens when the board comes to make policy. And it's also allowed me to look at it from both sides. From this is what we need to do as an institution to survive, but this is what happens to the students or to our constituents when we make those decisions.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Give me your top 3 issues.
My top 3 issues would be communication, and that's internal and external, the implementation of Measure B, and accreditation.
I would say 2/3 partial tax in June, is that
Correct.
right? So we usually support it. Okay, Meredith, welcome.
Thank you.
You're on.
The question was, what is my policy
You're
background?
gonna have to speak up, 'cause I've got saws in my ear.
All right. The question was, what is my policy background?
Yeah, don't worry
What-
about that.
What are my qualifications to serve on a public entity board? I've written policies for public entity boards to solve existing problems. For instance, a bond oversight committee which addresses transparency and appropriate utilization of taxpayers' money for the purpose of the bond, keeping the contract with the taxpayers. I've also written a procurement manual that deals with fiscal management, fiscal oversight, and it was necessary in order to bring a public entity's purchasing practices into a best practices.
Let me get you to step back for a little, just one sec, just so I understand. Tell me the nature of your law practice.
My law practice is representing public entities, representing school districts, and I have a strong concentration in construction. So I work with both public and private entities, large-scale construction, hospitals, school districts, My office represents school districts in various capacities, and also we represent small businesses.
Are you part of a bigger firm?
I'm part of a firm we were bigger before the recession. There are two of us right now.
Okay. And where's it based?
Oakland. We've always been
And the
in Oakland.
name of the firm is?
Bryant and Brown.
And so your clients, then give me some of your clients. It
I would
doesn't
prefer
include
not
Peralta?
to give, no, I would prefer not to give client names, because I try and keep my clients, some of them don't like to be in publicity, so I would prefer not to speak of client names. That's my private business, but in any case, with respect to
It does not include Peralta.
it does, I've never worked for Peralta.
Have you worked for any of the local East Bay districts?
Yes.
Well, your name certainly will show up then presumably on the expenditures, right?
You mean, will my name show up on
Your
Peralta's
firm's name
expenditures?
will show up on checks that the districts have spent.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let me ask again, what some of the districts you've worked for in the East Bay?
Oh, well, in the East Bay, I've worked with Oakland Unified. I actually helped them get out of fiscal receivership. And I've worked with doing work voluntarily. Well, I work with Hollister, that's Monterey.
Yeah.
And I've done some volunteer work, literacy work over at Hoover Elementary School. That's not going to show up on anybody's.
No. I meant your legal work. What you say? You know, which districts you've worked for in the East Bay?
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah. Oakland is the.
Yeah, Oakland is the East Bay district I've worked for.
Okay.
There might have been something else for, I've worked with the San Francisco, that's the Housing Authority.
Yeah.
But there might be other ones. Right now, Oakland, I did a lot of work for Oakland.
So let me ask you your philosophical approach to this. I mean, obviously, if you've read some of the stuff we've written editorially about Peralta, what's your reaction to what you've seen about Peralta's functioning and what we've written about it? What's your takeaway about how Peralta functions?
Well, I'm going to give my personal opinion.
Yes.
Right. So what I think we need is transparency. I think we need a fiscal responsibility in terms of not blanketly accepting what may be said in a meeting by staff, but drilling down and making sure that there are actually policies and procedures that are followed, that there's some sort of accountability in a regular assessment of how the chancellor is governing in terms of the management of staff, and making sure that the reports are not giving in conclusion without being able to weigh the issues before they get to a point that you can't really weigh in as in your leadership role. I wasn't sitting on the Peralta board, and I'm just talking about what I've seen, but what I generally see is that at times your hair is on fire by the time you get a chance to answer a question. That means that things have gone too far, and there's a way to manage that by having policies and procedures that are in place so that when a problem first arises, you're able to address it appropriately. For instance, one of the things that I worked with my clients is claims avoidance, by changing the way that problems are addressed when they first come up, as opposed to letting them snowball, so that by the time you get to a point where you're going before the board, you're saying you have 3 choices. None of them are good choices. None of them are the best choice. It's only what you're being presented with at the time, because you didn't have a structure that directed the way things were supposed to go in the most prudent way before that time.
Well, I guess what I'm really interested, tell you what, let's go to your 3 issues, and then I'll ask everybody. You know, you've raised some interesting questions that I want to talk about in terms of role of board members. But first, give me your 3 top issues.
Well, the first thing I think is most important is affordability and accessibility of education. That's a large topic, but what I mean by saying that is that we can do a better job of letting people know the availability of the community college education for the various roles that it serves, in terms of preparing kids for 4-year universities, in terms of preparing people for vocational careers, and in terms of being a retraining center for people. And then of course there's a lifelong learning. There are things that we could be doing a better job at, and so that's being more integrated into the community, where the first
Yeah, I just need the,
you
the
want
topic
the
areas
thumbnail.
right now. Yeah.
Okay, the other is interim financial solutions for the financial aid system is not working, not functioning properly at Peralta in terms of the technology and in terms of meeting the needs of students who have been granted financial aid. So short and long-term funding solutions. And then the other thing is overall making sure that there's a fiscal responsibility in the way that Peralta's run, and making sure that we have long-term plans to be able to address the emerging industries and the funding that's necessary to keep community colleges functioning and viable.
Let me take off for 1 second on the question you raised, or you brought up, that frankly I wanted to ask all of you about. As we watched what we considered a fiasco.
You'll have to specify which fiasco.
Okay.
So I don't mean to be facetious.
Okay, no, you raise a fair point. Shall we say the previous chancellor's leadership and the spending problems that came out of that and all. On the one hand, there is the need to oversee the chancellor. On the other hand, and the breakdown, it seemed there was that there was a lack of any thoughtful oversight. As you talked about, just accepting what was said, not drilling down. On the other hand, there were board members with their own pet micromanager and their own personal dipping at the till, if you will. Help me understand how you balance your role.
I think that maybe it's easier said than done. Possibly, I'm an optimist. But honestly, if you set benchmarks, if you set guidelines and goals, and then you regularly and routinely evaluate someone on those goals, you find out whether you're off target or not. You're able to keep track. You have made a long-term and a short-term plan, and you have benchmarks, and you go back and you evaluate. You set criteria and you evaluate the chancellor by that criteria. That's something that the board can implement through a well-planned and carefully crafted approach to making sure that they're getting the type of leadership that they need from their chancellor. Now, the micromanagement has to do with board members going off and trying to direct things instead of going through the chancellor. Really, the board should be evaluating the chancellor and talking to the chancellor about what goals they want to reach. And then there's even the 360, there's review where you could have people that the chancellor reports to come back and give their evaluations. There's a way to get a global perspective. I've seen public entities work very well, function well, where you have the general manager, you have in this case there's a chancellor that is responsible for various different departments and responsibilities work well when you know what you're supposed to be getting out of each of those departments, and when you know that you're getting an evaluation of your chancellor and each of those department heads. It can be done. It's been done effectively in public government, and I think that that's something that should be implemented at Peralta, and something that can be done from a board perspective. You don't have to go out and talk to each of the staff people yourself and tell them what to do when you know that you're supposed to be talking to your chancellor, and you give your chancellor clear guidelines on how you want policies and procedures implemented.
I agree with Meredith as far as having benchmarks set and a clear plan of what you're expecting. I also believe that the training let me step back a little, that when all of this came to the light, that the board became aware that they were lacking in some of their training areas, and the initiative that they've taken now to be more proactive with getting the training that they need and understanding what their role actually is going to allow for better leadership from the board as well as from the chancellor. I believe that taking that initiative, taking that step to say, okay, we're lacking in this area and we need to revisit what our responsibilities are, was a huge step on their part, and shows a lot of growth. I also believe that with the new chancellor coming in and a new relationship being established, as far as our direct contact is with the chancellor, and we are to get our information from him, I think they're going to establish a better working relationship where that open door is there, where they can have those frank discussions. I think previously they did depend on taking what they heard, and didn't understand or didn't realize that they had to drill down and ask more questions. And now with everything that has transpired, I believe that they've learned from their lessons. And moving forward,
You really think so, huh?
I do. I believe that
You talked to them?
I've talked to some, yes.
Who did you talk to?
As a matter of fact, I've had conversations with all, with the exception of Linda Handy. So I've talked to them all.
She may be the one who was to learn the most, but that's
Neither here nor there. That had discussions with all of them, and I feel better about what I've heard from them as a whole, as a board.
time.
As I've listened and as I've observed and as I've talked to people, especially going door to door, everything you hear is about how it's a mess. That's what I've got from
Everything you hear is what?
about how Peralta is a mess right now.
Okay.
That's what I've seen. That's what I've heard as I've gone door to door, and I've actually knocked on the doors of professors or other classified staff who work with Peralta. Their feeling is that the Peralta board is a mess. My take on that, and one of the reasons why I'm really running, is because I feel that that's because of a lack of sincere leadership. Unfortunately, our political system is filled with politicians. Knock knock. But it's a difference between leading and being a politician, because as more people get elected into office and they're more concerned about taking their next political step or paying back the people who helped them get into office, less leadership takes place. And I think that lack of leadership is what led to the fiascos, as you guys have so gently
Okay,
put
let
it.
me ask you, Ty.
Yes.
You've got this sort of feedback from talking to runners, or what have you observed?
What have I observed? I've observed a board that doesn't function well together. I've seen a lot of personal issues get in the way of making sound decisions.
Can you give me examples?
I would prefer not to give specific examples because it's more behind the scenes thing that I've heard as I've talked to people. So you notice the little sniping, the rolling of eyes, and some of the personal issues are actually, I guess they're a little bit more well documented than I'm even letting on to, because I've heard it, from quite a few people. But once again, I just think that's because it's more people, they're more concerned about feathering their own nest. They're more concerned about getting along to go along, as they either want to make sure they secure their position in that seat or look for their future political moves. One of the things that I've learned about leadership is that leadership is difficult. It takes time, it takes effort. And as Meredith and Jarena both already said, it takes putting systems in place, and then not only putting those systems in place, but holding people accountable to using the system, and then leading people through the use of the system.
Okay, let me ask you a question. See, does anybody have a sense of roughly what property taxpayers contribute to the Peralta district on an annual basis?
I did not know that number off the top of my head.
That's a good question. I know that it's the measure B, I think, was about, I'm thinking the number 86, but I'm not exactly sure if that's the correct number that our property tax dollars will go up. I can tell you that part of what I've been engaged in with
Do you know what else they pay? Measure B is 86, you said.
I'm
and, sure.
talking from what I believe my recollection is.
Right, yeah, no, I know. just almost doubled the tax. It's 48.
Maybe
but
that's
okay.
what it feels like.
Yeah,
But I was gonna say,
okay. And but I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that one of the things I worked on in terms of community organization and action is I'm on the board of a local youth sports group, and you know the kids don't have a safe place to play. Peralta has these great fields. Merritt in particular has fields. I organized the kids and the parents to get a contract where we pay $75,000 a year, and these are fields that are already supported by taxpayers' money. But you know, of course, there's a cost. There's maintenance costs. But you know, the one of the things that keeps coming up is that we pay for these already, and now we have to pay again to use them, and you know what the restrictions are. So I know that there's a feeling of frustration and a feeling
You
of
pay for them already.
so the tax. Well, you know, there was the prior bond measure that put in the stadium up at Merritt. There's bond money that pays the operations.
And how do you pay for those bonds?
It's through the tax, the property taxes, and then.
Do you know what you're paying for that?
I'm trying to. Well, you said I just doubled it. I'm trying to
No,
remember
that was the
what I
parcel
pay.
tax.
I'm trying to remember what I pay.
Yeah.
I mean, I do
Yeah.
pay them. I'm trying to
Yeah, I
remember.
usually
I
know.
have a sense of that I'm contributing, but as far as the exact amount, I have not calculated the exact amount that I paid as a property
Anyone else?
owner.
No, I haven't
Then I've
calculated.
lived here
I
for-
keep it all in one binder.
Okay. Well, just so you guys know, B is a $48 flat fee.
Mhm.
It's a partial tax. So what does that go for?
Well, you're talking about B. I know B is going to pay for facilities improvements on the bond measure, or is that measure A?
That's measure A.
That's measure. Okay, B is the one that's supposed to be replacing core classes, English and math, and
Yes.
paying for operations costs because of the amounts that were cut.
B is
And-
a partial tax.
yeah,
That's
and then-
for operations.
And then the other one that we just passed, I've seen there are different facilities improvements that have gone forward with that. And there's also a solar power program that's
Mhm.
gone forward.
And that's a school construction.
Yeah, the one that was before this latest one to
Right.
restore the
And-
things cut. In the,
Anyone have any memories of what that costs you?
Measure A, what it costs the individual? No, I don't, but I
I
know
can't-
we was over 300 million that the bond measure was.
I can't
Well,
say that I've-
everybody knows the money that's coming in.
I can't say
The
that I
question
researched
is, what are
it.
taxpayers paying out?
I can
know,
tell you if I could pull out my notes,
Yeah.
I could
Yeah,
tell you.
Yeah, Meredith raises a good point, though. You know, I mean, these people, I feel like they're paying for it already.
No, I could tell you because I looked it up, but as far as holding it all in my head all
That's
the time.
okay. Well, here's the
Okay,
answer,
that's
just so
it.
you know. Okay, the bond measure works out right now to about $45 per 100,000 assessed valuation.
Is that measure A?
I would assume it's measure A.
Okay.
It's the bond measure.
Okay.
Okay, and that, and the average assessed value is about 300,000+ in the district. So that works out. It turns out to about 135, 140. It's actually about an average 143 for the average home in the district. Add the 48 that they passed, and it works out to about 191. Anyway, so while you guys are struggling on that, where you're sitting back and watching expenditures and that you're thinking, wondering about them, and you're curious what you think, should you guys, if as elected trustees, be receiving receiving health benefits?
I knew that there are health benefits.
There are health benefits.
That for-
Should you be receiving?
should we be receiving?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you I haven't really looked into what the overall. I've looked into more what the retirement benefits are and what the liability is. But as far as the health benefits for Peralta and whether or not the trustees should receive them, I'm not sure what that structure is based on and and how it's come about. One of the things that I could tell you I've been more focused on looking at is what the challenges are for Peralta in terms of what their liabilities are, what their service is, where the money appears to be, what management approaches the current trustees think could be more effective.
Okay, we'll come to the liabilities, but in a second, but I'm curious, the health benefits.
I need to look at why the trustees are included in health benefits to begin with, and I don't really understand why that is. I know that I serve on a citizens oversight board for Actia, and I know that if you show up, they give you a check for $25. It's almost like witness fees if you drive and go to court, or grand jury fees. Or I can understand that. I really don't know what the basis of the health benefits are, and I don't know how it came about. I don't know what the bargaining was. So,
Well, they wouldn't be bargaining.
well, I mean, I don't know who. Somebody had to have made an argument that. So
Sure,
I don't
why
really.
not?
You think that was what it was? Sure, why not? If we're at the table, let's throw it in for the trustees too. Or
Well, yeah, I mean, I know it's that you're all there at the table, but
I
it's a
don't
long-standing
know if that's
tradition.
generally the way it's done in other boards. It's news to me. It's not a policy or a practice that I'm really familiar with, to be honest with
Do
you.
you have thoughts on its merits?
I'm not sure how many hours that you would actually. It seems like you would have to have a minimum number of hours before you would qualify for some type of compensation. That what it is the compensation. It looks like it should be equivalent to some sort of part-time employee status. And I don't know what the hours of the work entail, or how much studying, or how much outreach you're supposed to do, or how many meetings you're supposed to. So I'm not sure what it's. When I say I'm not sure what it's based on, I don't know whether it's calculated in line with a part-time employee benefits.
Sure, you have thoughts?
I have thoughts. I believe that it's a nice perk for the trustees. I also believe that if there are options for the trustees to have medical benefits from another source, say from their job or from a spouse, that they should opt out, just because of what it costs the district, what it costs us to maintain our health benefits.
What do you think about the policy of offering?
I think it's a nice perk.
Well, I know it's a nice perk. That's not the question. That dodges the question.
Particularly if you have some trustees that cannot get health care for whatever reason at the time. I think that it's nice that the district thinks of wanting to ensure that their trustees are healthy and will be able to serve. Again, I think it's a personal issue for each person on how they view the healthcare benefits and what all goes into it. And it's a personal choice of whether I'm accepting it or not accepting it.
Well, it's a policy choice as to whether to offer or not offer.
Yes.
And that's what I'm driving at.
I was going to ask, do you know if it's, I'm sorry to be asking you, do you know if it's tied to hours, or do you have?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not.
And I won't parse with the answer. I think it's absolutely absurd. This is a part-time position. This isn't a full-time position. Even at a regular corporate job, you have to work 40 hours a week. There are companies right now that people blast continuously because they manage their workers' hours so they won't work 40 hours a week so that they can't get health benefits. So here we are, we have an elected position where you're supposed to exercise leadership, and instead you're making sure you're taking care of your own health care benefits while cutting classes and cutting access to the community to take more classes. Or actually looking at making cuts to pension benefits for those who are out there working over 40 hours a week for the district. So once again, this goes to me as a lack of leadership, and it's a political game, and it's politicians looking to take care of themselves instead of the people that they're elected to serve.
Well, I was going to say that I think in terms of leadership, the arrangement should be that you don't get something for nothing. And there should be some sort of standard or some sort of requirement that any compensation that's coming from filling the role of a trustee, fulfilling the responsibility of trustee, should have some sort of measurement where the performance is tied to any type of compensation that comes with it. If you show up for jury duty, you get your jury fees. If you show up for Peralta and you actually do the work and you put in the hours, then I think that if there's compensation that comes, it should be associated with that. If that's what the elected office has arranged, it should be tied to some performance, just like we're talking about tying the challenge.
Well, it's tied to performance of the polls, I guess.
I don't think that's enough. I mean, there could be a way to address it so that you actually have to put in hours and do some sort of. I mean, there has to be some measurement. But you're right. The public says whether they're going to vote
There's
you
no
back in.
requirement for how many hours you put in.
I think that is an oversight. I think that's a
Well,
mission.
Who would enforce that?
Trustees could enforce that. Trustees
On
could
each
say,
other?
That's the problem.
absolutely. Trustees could do that.
They
Trustees
could
could
enforce the hours that another
No,
trustee.
trustees could set a policy saying that compensation is tied to performance, it's tied to showing up, it's tied to putting in the hours. In other words, if you're going to hold a position, you actually have to go out and be present. You actually have to put in hours in your community. You actually have to put in hours at your job. You actually have to put in hours reading your material. I think that it's what you've pointed
I
out.
think that raises some problematic problems when
Who tracks
trustees
that?
start enforcing each other's behavior.
No,
Because these trustees don't report to each other.
No, we're talking about policy. We're talking about what I'm talking about is
Talking
a
about
policy.
tying money to performance.
We're talking about a compensation. In other public entities, I've seen that you get the check for your being at a meeting after you've been there, after you've logged in. What you pointed out at Peralta is that there is a compensation that doesn't appear to be tied to anything other than holding the position. That appears to be something that could cause a morale issue, or could cause people to feel like you're actually not
But you think
taking your responsibility
philosophically they should receive it if they're putting in the hours.
I think that if they're putting in the hours and they're actually serving and being responsible and bringing value, that I don't think that it's a problem because they're actually working. If you're not working and receiving it, then I think that it's a lack of performance. It's a lack of it's not justified.
I'm clear where you are. You're not waffling on this.
I'm frustrated because you're
Well,
talking.
I got you.
Yeah,
You
it's
don't have to weigh in.
10 hours a
I'm
month.
clear where you are.
10 hours a month. Okay.
Did you want to add any more?
Well, one, there is a policy that's tied to the compensation, and you are required to show up in order to be compensated.
You're not required to show up to collect your health insurance.
You're not required to show up to collect the health insurance, no. However, I do believe that the compensation of health insurance, it's a very sticky issue, and my personal belief is that I would not, if I had access to other means, I would not put that on the district, knowing what it's costing us as far as health benefits are concerned.
Do you have other means?
Excuse me?
Do you have other means?
Yes, I do.
What do you do otherwise?
I'm a full-time student,
Where?
UC Berkeley,
In?
poli-sci,
Grad or undergrad?
undergrad.
Talk professors later.
Excuse me?
We can talk about professors later.
Sure.
Okay.
I'd love it.
Okay, so Meredith started talking about the liabilities. What's your take? What sorts of liabilities were you talking about?
Well, what we've been dealing with most recently is Jerry Brown's initiative, his legislation that comes into effect in January 2013 that's going to affect employee pensions, because that's something that we've sort of been kicking the can down the road with in state government. And I think that's a really serious issue that our state legislature has tried to address. And that's something that Peralta has been struggling with. And it's led to some difficulties in back in 2005 getting into the swaps that have then caused an interest spike. And that's something that I think is going to be a serious issue that the trustees are going to have to continue to grapple with as we deal with an economy that
I
is
thought
not.
the swaps were for the OPEB liability.
Well, that is for the OPEB liability, and that's one of
which
the
is distinct from the pension liability,
Well, other
right? I mean, you started discussing Jerry Brown.
Oh,
and
340.
The pension.
Well, I see.
Yeah.
There's OPEB, and that's other that's other employment
Post-employment benefits.
benefits, and then there's also 340. So yes, those are two separate things, but they're both issues that have to do with how you're going to manage the benefits that you're providing to employees and the long-term liabilities. So I've been studying those because I think that it's something that I'm going to need to be versed in order to provide responsible and thoughtful advice and direction.
So what's your takeaway on the responsible way to fund retirement benefits?
Well, I think that we
Since you've
have to
been
make
studying
sure that we take the steps to quantify exactly how much the liability is, and then get better actuarial projections that tell us exactly where we are with the current demographics that we have, so that we understand what our population is like now as opposed to what it was before. When
Okay, let's assume you get great actuarials.
we got to fund it.
That's not the
We have to
that
do
isn't the
reserves.
problem.
What I think is we have to have real reserves, and in
Are
terms
we
of
talking OPEB or pension now?
I'm talking about both of them, because
Okay.
there are some plans in place for OPEB, but I think that I don't think that problem has gone away entirely. So I'm looking at them both. So I think that what we really have to do is we have to have reserves. We have to find direct sources of funding that are going to meet those requirements, because it means that we're making contracts with people that we're not able to fulfill, and it also means that we are passing on liability as opposed to paying it when we have promised to do so.
Have you unsorted the swaps, the obligation bonds, and the OPEB plan itself to figure out what the unfunded liabilities are when you sort it all out?
When I look at it, I see figures that are old. I don't see figures that are current. So I'm still trying to find out what the real-time liabilities are. I'm having a little bit of difficulty in the data that I have so far, and I only have what's available through research online. No, but I think I'm still digging.
Okay. You're on.
I believe that we need to be a little bit more aggressive with how we're handling some of the OPEB issues and the swaps. Trying to renegotiate the interest rates is one thing, but there are other entities in other countries that has suffered the way that Peralta has suffered and has gone
Other
after
entities in other countries, what are you from?
there are other school boards and other small businesses that tried to
In
do
other countries?
in other countries like England,
Uh-huh.
that tried to do the same things that we tried to do here as far as investing and all of that, and they suffered, with the high interest rates and the loss of revenue like we have. And instead of just trying to renegotiate the interest rates, they actually tried to sue some of the companies that they worked with, and a few have
Talking
been
down the swaps?
and a few have been successful. So the research that I've been conducting is reading up on what's been going on in England and seeing if that's a viable.
Okay, let me ask you something.
Sure.
The swaps were a bet, basically, weren't they?
Yes.
The district made a bet.
Yes.
They basically lost the bet.
Yes, they did.
They knew what they were doing. Why should the providers of the money renegotiate?
I believe that all of the information was not out there. That they didn't have all the information.
Like what?
Like I did. Oh my goodness. Like what? 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 forget that I'm speaking with a reporter. I have to be careful.
You know something you don't that I don't know?
Quite possibly.
Like what?
A lot of things.
Okay. I'm all ears.
I know you
You
are.
certainly don't have confidential information on this.
No, I don't, which is a good thing. However, some of the information that I do have, I hold closely. So I believe
Some of the information you have, what information would you have if you're running for public office and you have public information? Why would you hold it closely? What does that mean?
I said information that I had. I didn't necessarily say it was public information. It's just information that I have, personal conversations that I've had that has that I hold closely.
Okay.
I believe that not all of the information was given out or given out in a way that it was understandable to the board. When we start talking about finance and investment, I believe that a lot of time needs to be taken to explain exactly what it means, exactly what happened. And I don't.
Who failed there?
At that point in time, I believe it would have been the CFO at that time.
Okay. So why is that the problem? The swap holders.
That we didn't have why is it their problem that we didn't get the right information? It's really not. It's our problem.
So why should
But
they
in-
renegotiate? Because the district had internal communication problems.
It would-
Assuming you're right.
It would be, why should they? It would be a real nice act of good faith to renegotiate, to say, okay, we understand.
And if the bet had gone the other way, would you guys have renegotiated?
Of course not. And I understand your point, but I still believe that working to renegotiate, working to make sure that everything was done legal and proper is something that we should hold in the forefront.
Okay. So what's your philosophical approach to retirement debt?
You know, I believe that we should keep the promises that we've made.
Well, everybody agrees to that.
But I also believe that we have to be realistic about where we are in time. And I believe that everyone has to come to the table with realism.
With what?
Realism. You know, this is really what's happening. This is what's going on. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. And come to some middle ground. I think that there has to be give on both sides. And as hard as that is to say and as hard as that is to do, I really think that that's the only way that we'd be able to move forward.
Time.
I think this is a big festering wound, and the thing that you
What
have
is
to
this?
our pension obligation and our shortfalls because of the gambles that were taken by politicians. So I think that this is a big festering wound, and the thing that you have to do when you have a wound is the first thing you have to do is stop the bleeding. So there has to be some, as Jarena was just stating, some serious negotiation about how do we stop signing contracts and going into agreements that are unfunded when we already have this huge obligation. I think we just have to be honest about that. I think everyone has said we have to meet our obligations and our agreements that we've already put in place. But moving forward, we have to have a better plan. We've seen what can happen with unfunded obligations with pensions and post-employment. We've seen this now. We've watched how this story unfolds. We've gone to the stock market and tried to gamble with the money to try to find a way to fund it, and that didn't work. So how many more times are we going to continue to do the same thing and expect a different result? We have to be honest about it, have serious conversations about how do we treat our employees fairly while maintaining the solvency in the future of our community college system.
Give me your thoughts on non-competitive bidding or non-competitive contracts.
I think they are tools that politicians use to give paybacks and favors to political donors, to boosters, to backers, to endorsers. I think it's important that we have a competitive bidding process for every tax dollar that we spend. That way we are ensuring that we are getting not only the best price, but the best service for the dollars that we're spending. As I'll take a look at some of the budget decisions that have been made on different projects, you see how amendments continue to come forward because projects were initiated without a true understanding of what the scope should be. So 1 year down the line, we're raising, now we got to do another 90,000. We have to do another 100,000 because we had this project overrun, or we didn't foresee this issue. I think,
So you're supportive of competitive bidding
yes,
in all cases?
in all cases.
I agree with Ty. I am supportive of competitive bidding. Believe that it speaks to our integrity.
Meredith?
So the question, as I understand, is what are your thoughts on non-competitive bidding?
Right.
I think that we have competitive bidding for construction projects to get the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, which means you want someone who's qualified to do the work. You want them to sharpen their pencils, you want them to compete, you want to get the market system to work on your behalf. There's also something called sole source. I've actually worked on procurements where you may have one engine manufacturer, say, that runs the ferry fleet back and forth for the Golden Gate Ferry in San Francisco. You're not going to get more than one bidder on that. There's some where you don't get more than one bidder. In those instances, you're supposed to evaluate the market, find out if if it's fair and reasonable, if you're getting a good price, if it saves you time having to ship it from somewhere else. But it's a matter of evaluating what the market provides so that you're making sure that the entity that you're representing or that you're working for is getting the best price. So, you know, I understand what your question is, and I understand
What's the genesis? of the
you're
question?
asking me if I understand what competitive bidding is meant for and whether I understand.
Why am I asking it?
Because I think that it's.
Why am
if
I
some-
asking specifically in regard to Peralta?
Oh, because I think that Peralta has made some decisions or has taken some actions in the past that may have not been the wisest. And what I'm trying to impart in terms of my understanding of competitive bidding and sole source is that I understand the difference. And I understand that if you're going to make a decision where you're going to go with the sole source and it's fair and it's reasonable and it's for the benefit of the entity that you're working for, that you're representing, then that's something that best practices supports. If you're
let
making
me be real specific. Is there a situation where you would do sole source bidding? And maybe this is an oxymoron by definition, but is there a situation where you would not do competitive bidding when there are multiple sources
No,
to provide the work?
No, there's no sole source justification when there are multiple sources that can provide the work or the product.
That's where I'm driving.
Exactly, and
Okay.
I wanted you to know that I know the difference. I'm not going to give you a pat answer because I think I'm telling you what you want to hear. I actually know the difference, and that's one of the reasons I think that I would be the best qualified candidate for this job. I know the difference. I know how boards misfunction. I know how they're supposed to function, and being able to sit in that seat and say, wait a minute, what you're handing me in this report is not okay. You didn't do your homework. Or you go back and you show me the memo where you justify that you went and you got different bids, or you proved to me that there's only one part or one engine or one whatever. You go show me. And that type of experience and background, I think, is important to have when you're in the position of a trustee of a large institution that is already challenged in terms of the range of people it needs to serve and the amount of money it has and the experience that it's had in losing some of the public confidence.
Okay, let me be real specific and ask you guys, are you familiar with their solar contracts?
I've seen the work, but as far as how it was let, I don't know the background of how it was let.
Sole source, Chevron, $8.1 million contract.
Chevron
Chevron Energy Solutions.
is
Chevron Energy Solutions did their solar, $8.1 million. They actually had indications that they could have saved about $1.5 million if they put it out to bid. And just so happens Chevron had donated to the district's foundation.
Oh, no, that's a disappointment. I see why you're asking the question.
That's why I'm asking the question.
That reduces.
Is that
public
justified in any? Can you justify
I
it in any
can't
way?
see how in the Bay Area where there's so many solar companies, I can't see why you would not go out to competitive bid.
Can you see any reason?
Nope.
And
Especially when you could have included small businesses in that.
what you could also do when you go out to bid is you put the different criteria that you want to see. If you want a solar company because there's a green energy program at Peralta, if you say you want to see if they can do any training, if you could set the criteria so that you can get the whole range of the type of response that you want. There's ways. I've drafted these things. I know. So if someone brought this to me, I would tell them, give me another pass at this. Let me go back and do your homework. Show it to me again, because I know that you can write provisions and you can write requirements that meet the needs of the institution. That's the whole purpose of that structure, that bidding structure.
We should wrap up, but I mean, Meredith, give me your philosophy on access to records by the public.
Oh, my philosophy is that it's such an important. The Public Records Act is such an important measure of it's such an important tool, or I should say process of accountability, and it's so often not properly fulfilled and not properly managed. And one of the
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that there's very specific guidelines. Within 10 days, you get a response to a Public Records Act request. You can ask if you're not clear on what the people want, and then you can say if it's going to cost you a bunch of money to go find it. You could say, look, it's going to cost me this much. Do you mind paying for it? There's very clear ways.
Well, actually, the search fees are not. The search time is not billable.
If you have
The reproduction.
the reproduction is,
but
and
the
if you
search
have
fees
to,
are not.
well, what you're asking me
Yeah,
is,
okay.
and what you're asking me is, what's my philosophy?
Mm-hmm.
I think the Public Records Act is one of the best ways that you show the public you're doing their business appropriately. It's the check and balance. It's the way that you gain public confidence, and it's the way that you show people that you're working for them with their tax dollars in the way that you represent that you're doing it, and in the way that the law is intended to function. I think
Let me be clear on what I'm really driving at here. There's a lot of discretion, if you will, with the agency. Or that by discretion I mean that the law sets a minimum level of disclosure, but it doesn't set the maximum level of disclosure. There are many times when you may have an option to disclose or not disclose, because you may be able to hide behind, if you will,
I don't
an
think that's
exception.
appropriate.
Pardon?
I don't think it's appropriate to. The spirit of the law is that the public the public records are the public's business, and they're supposed to be available to the public. I think that is the way that the Public Records Act is intended to be interpreted and intended to be followed. So I want to be very clear that responding appropriately to the Public Records Act is extremely important, and I don't think that it's done enough or as thoroughly by entities. And I've actually drafted public records response protocols because I think that it is mostly, it's often through dysfunction that records are not properly kept, that people don't produce them. And if it's not that, then it should be apparent that it's someone that's hiding them, because you have the way that you maintain the records is through a routine and through a responsible practice so that they're kept for the appropriate number of years, they're kept in a specific place, and if somebody says what they need, you can get them their records because taxpayers pay for
Have
this.
you? Can you send me a copy of a sample of your protocol?
I'll look and see if I could find
Okay.
one that I've written, but I think that's I want to be clear. I think it's extremely important, and it's something that I try and urge clients that I work for to uphold and to do a very thorough and responsible job in responding to.
Do you understand what I'm saying about how an agency chooses to interpret the law can make a huge difference on how my
I've actually prosecuted a Public Records Act request from the side of being the requester. So, I mean, I'm trying to, I don't want to give up any client,
Right.
But I've seen it's done in a way that I don't
understand.
And it's frustrating, and you can't believe the way that people are categorizing things, and so
So you understand what I'm asking about that?
I understand
Yeah.
from being frustrated by not having it.
We're still sore over the litigation we had to go through with Peralta.
I've experienced it where you have a sense of disbelief.
Yeah.
So one of the
Okay.
things I'm trying to do in this interview is I don't want to talk about things that are client,
I get it.
but it's appalling.
I get it.
I've been appalled by that.
Okay, Dorina?
I believe that it is a right that the entity should respond as written in the law, and I believe it's another tool that focuses on our entity's integrity, and that the good faith effort is to answer to the best of your ability.
Hi.
I believe that this is, I think the act is a necessity, although it shouldn't have to be. When you're talking about public office, we're making a decision on how to spend taxpayer dollars. I don't think they should have to jump through all the hurdles to find out what conversations, what paperwork, what information we use to make a decision. I think that organizations that try to withhold this kind of information are the reasons why you get these no bid contracts or these sole priorship contracts, and sole source contracts, instead of having things out in the open. If you have something to hide, or if you have something to hide, if you have a problem releasing information, it's because deep down inside that you didn't do something right. If you feel like you're doing the right thing, there shouldn't be all these hurdles. There shouldn't be this wasted dollars spent on litigation because we don't want to talk about how we made a decision on how to spend your taxpayer dollars. That's just, that's one of those, you say it out loud, it just doesn't make sense, does it?
Okay, so folks, I really want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.